Hey everyone, I am really excited about today's episode as I'm going to have with me retired Navy SEAL turned HR executive Tom DeJarnette on the show. Tom and I are going to delve into why it seems so hard for organizations to hold employees accountable for their behavior and their work performance, and why managers struggle with holding people accountable. We'll dig into specific strategies to learn what it takes to create a culture of accountability. This is truly going to be a great show, and having Tom share his expertise from his years of special operations service and his civilian career. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast, exploring the issues, challenges, strategies, and solutions. Sponsored by RPCHR and hosted by Natalie Ivey, an HR consultant, licensed PI, and author of the best-selling book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. And now, here's Natalie.
Hey everybody, welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast. I'm Natalie Ivey, and I am so excited to have a very special guest on today. I have with me today Tom DeJarnette, and Tom is a retired Navy SEAL, and he is going to be discussing something that is really important. The topic for today is leadership, accountability, and lessons from the front line. So before we get into the topic for the podcast, Tom, would you just share with our listening audience a brief career bio and also how one actually becomes a Navy SEAL?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think I might take that in reverse order. So becoming a SEAL, today it's a lot easier to find some background information and, for anybody who's thinking about it, workouts and nutrition and coaching and mentoring. You can go online and find a lot of that stuff now to help you prepare. But back whenever I was going through, there wasn't anything. And so I got interested because there was an ROTC club of SEALs, and they would come down to the pool while I was in swim practice. And so I got interested in that way. And slowly my friends on the team started getting jobs, and I didn't have a job. And this seemed like a great way to hang on to my youth. And so I stayed with it. And, then you go to BUD/S, you compete, you go to BUD/S. I went the Officer Candidate School route. And then BUD/S it's a 6-month process, and you get thousands of applicants every year, and they go through the screening test, the physical screening test, and that whittles them down into a much smaller number. And that small number, gets chopped up into about 6 classes per year. And then when you get your class is generally around 220 some odd people in a class, and you go through 6 months of first phase, which I'm going to call it the selection phase, that culminates in Hell Week. And that's where, that's an opportunity, before you invest too much time and energy in somebody, it's an opportunity for them to see if they want the program by going through the crucible. And it's an opportunity for the instructors who they're also teammates and people who've been through the program to see if they want you in this fraternity. And so, so after that, that's when you lose the majority of people is in first phase or in selection in Hell Week. And so you lose about 60%, 70% of the class. And then you go into dive phase and land warfare phase, and you lose another, 5-10%. And so the attrition rate in SEAL team is, north of 80%. I mean, it's probably even closer to 90%. But if you make it through that crucible, you've learned a lot of life lessons. You've learned a lot about what we're going to talk about today, about accountability, both individual accountability and organizational accountability. And you've learned how, it's not a bad word. It's actually something that you look forward to because, whenever you are accountable, and whenever you're able to build on that individual accountability into organizational accountability, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity because, you begin to think beyond yourself and outside of yourself, and you look for opportunity, and you define your success and how well you help your teammates. And so you learn things like that in BUD/S, and then as your career carries on. And so that's kind of the long and short of how BUD/S works. And we'll probably come back to it a little bit more throughout the podcast today, but that's just kind of the long and short of how it works. I was lucky enough to do 26 years. Retired as a SEAL captain and numerous combat deployments. So it was some highlights. Got to do the Al-Fa, which was a pre-war target to kick off the war. That was really a special event in my life. Got to be commanding officer of SEAL Team 1. And then, the Navy and the military in general provides great opportunities to go and live overseas. And so I got to do 3 overseas tours where I lived in Belgium, Japan, and Spain. And, working with those different cultures and, being living in those cultures, affects the way that, we think about everything, to include things like accountability. And so those were a special career, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And frankly, I miss it a little bit. But then I retired in 2019, got 2 jobs in the private sector. One is chief administrative officer for a healthcare company here in town. Second was chief people officer, which is how we got to know each other. Thank you very much for the opportunity today. I should have said that. I should have led with that, but it comes from us having worked together and you helping me with a lot of, difficult, complex, legal related, Department of Labor related HR issues. So thank you for that. And thanks for, allowing me to come on today and talk with you. But I got to be the chief people officer for a fintech blockchain company out of New York. And, in the middle of all that, I've got to do a little leadership and cultural development consulting as well. And I'm always looking to join good teams and build good teams. So I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and talk about some of the things that we're both passionate about.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, very much so. And for the listening audience, so my company is RPC Human Resources. And when Tom was back with the fintech blockchain company, we did some work together and helping his team really get up to speed on all things kind of regulatory compliance. So we did a special project for them. And I'm really delighted to have you, Tom. And for my listening audience who may not know, my husband is a retired sergeant major in the U.S. Army, and Ken was in the Army Reserves for a long time. And so I've had some lengthy discussions with him as well regarding accountability. Now that we have a little bit more understanding of your background, Tom, I want to dig in on the topic of leadership and accountability. And just recently, I was a guest speaker at the HR Florida conference, and I was talking about, of course, investigations and employee relations and how to handle complaints. And the topic was really a crash course. So the folks attending my session, they were learning a little bit of the 101 type of a class on how to investigate. But something that is continuing to come up, not only at the conference, but just in my day-to-day business, is that when managers are sitting down with employees and having these crucial discussions, maybe it's a behavioral issue, an employee is violating policies, or the employee is just simply not performing to the expectations, and then the supervisor sits them down to have the conversation, and instead of the employee absorbing and processing the feedback and being accountable, they completely go the opposite direction. What they do is turn it around that the supervisor is either bullying them or the supervisor is harassing them. And then, they try to allege that it was based on a protected characteristic. Or one of the latest things that's really emerged over the last year to 18 months is mental health issues, where an employee is simply not performing. And now they run to HR and allege that their supervisor is now creating mental health issues, and now they need to take leave as a result of it, or they're even asking for a reasonable accommodation to not even work with that supervisor, which, by the way, the courts are on our side on that. Generally, that is not going to be reasonable to just completely say, I can't work with this supervisor. So can you share your thoughts a little bit from your perspective, being a retired SEAL and having worked in leadership, even in the private sector, on anything that you've observed that's kind of happening? Are you seeing some of that show up?
Yeah, well, thank you. This is a big topic, right? Obviously, with a lot of twists and turns, a lot of legal ramifications, and then a lot of softer, less definable, more art of war type discussion. So, yes, a big subject. But it also goes to the heart of any healthy organization. So, yeah, I'm excited to dig in, and yes, I'm passionate about this stuff, and so I retired in 2019, right? And so got to join the private sector, and I enjoyed, crosswalking a lot of these concepts on organizational accountability, right? And organizational accountability to me goes to culture, right? Goes directly to culture. as well as individual accountability. And for me, that goes to competence, performance, and character, right? And we'll probably dig into more of this stuff later on. But, when I get to crosswalk those proven concepts from my military experiences into the private sector, it's extremely rewarding and it's gratifying. And I think it works real well because, a lot of the times that we were doing this stuff in the military, it was under very stressful conditions, almost, sometimes no fail conditions. And so, these concepts, they work there. We proved that they work there, and getting to take them into the private sector was certainly very rewarding. For instance, I got to work a lot on organizational accountability in my first job after the military. And one of the things that really stands out is I got to develop a strategic management plan for an LLC that we were establishing underneath the larger company. We were establishing mainly to deal with the gig economy and the rules that were coming online in California. And it was a way we were going to deal with it, but that's kind of beside the point. For the purposes of this conversation, the management plan, obviously it include some siloed KPIs, key performance indicators, to use the private sector vernacular. But we also developed cross-functional KPIs, and we tied them to decision points that helped us move from one phase of effort into another phase of effort in a fairly deliberate way, right? And we were also able to tie in manpower to the phased growth as well. And so when that plan, as we discussed that plan and as it was refined over time, we realized that we were creating cross-functional accountability, right? And implied task ownership, in addition to, things that may be outlined in somebody's position description, right? So, when you look at somebody's position description and they've got their specified tasks on things that they're going to do, that's what you're accountable for. Right. And that's what it can grade you against, right? Well, we found out that, as we built this comprehensive, holistic plan, and there were cross-functional opportunities for decision-making and accountability, it kind of, you start making rings around your individual accountability. And now you're out to a cross-functional line of accountability. And then there's an organizational, and then there's a partnership account. And so it makes that individual accountability piece much easier, and it makes it more meaningful, impactful, whenever you do that. And so that's something that we found from, just doing good work, just trying to do our job, the byproduct on that was increased accountability because it was implied tasks that came from the cross-functional nature of some of these tasks, right? We also had, other discussions where we talked about where we fit in the supply chain, both directly and indirectly, and how that aligned with our priority efforts. And so now that's another ring on the accountability spectrum, or the accountability, spheres, right? Because now we're talking about how are we accountable to our customers and our partners and things like that. And so, it's really compelling, and it builds on each other, and it's all snaps together really nice. And when we were able to explain the why behind it all in a really compelling and transparent way, well, I got to say, it created a more resilient culture. And when you create that resilient culture of trust, it reduces the anxiety. It reduces the behavioral issues that you're having throughout an organization, because people are committed to something bigger than themselves. They're not worried about themselves. They're worried about helping their teammates succeed, because they realize that their success will come naturally if they're helping their teammates. Right.
Fantastic. And, you bring up a really great point where you talked about and hit on a few things. Number one is it's really defining culturally the type of organization that you need to have. Then you did the work on the strategic management and key performance indicators. So an individual has a job description that's their own, yet the implied tasks and making sure that you're accountable there. And then also when you start building that culture, the complaints go down. One of the things I'm noted for saying out in the HR community is the best investigation is the one you don't have to do. And the point in that is that when we have better leadership, and I've personally experienced this even back before I started my own company 22 years ago, and I was running an HR department, when you have a really solid management team and leaders who know how to communicate expectations, when you do have strong values and leaders know how to have these good, crucial conversations, and we're good at memorializing those, then it doesn't open that door for all those behavioral problems, which is what is showing up today. And it really is the formula, if you will, for the reduction of complaints and to not have to do nearly as many investigations. HR investigations, and we've talked some shop in the past, are a reactionary process to something broken in the business. It really is. Now, obviously, you're going to have just one-off people who behave in just really completely inappropriate behavior, and there are a variety of reasons sometimes when that happens. Those are kind of the one-offs. What I'm talking about are not necessarily the things that are rising to the level of the real serious things, such as discrimination, harassment, but a lot of the other things that employee relations is really all about. A lot of the larger businesses today have established entire employee relations departments just to handle the volume of complaints that employees have about working with their manager and their teams. It's interesting. Yeah. So
Well, yes. So, and that kind of, that is a perfect segue for, my second job where I actually got to be in that's how we met. And that's where I got to be in the chief people officer role. And I got the opportunity to deal with people. And so, my second job, it was really enjoyable because, one of the soft truths is people first. You can't build people in times of crisis, right? It takes time and to build that trust, to build those relationships. And so I got the opportunity to focus on people in my second job. And what's even more special about this second job is everybody in this organization was a learner. They were professional learners and personal learners, right? So if I could interact with them and I could explain the reasoning behind something, either professionally or personally, in a way that resonated with them, and then maybe even get some bonus points by connecting into related concepts, then they were all in, right? And so my approach with this, my second job as a chief people officer, my approach was setting the conditions so that everybody felt comfortable in their work environment, comfortable with their teammates, comfortable. And you talked about this, we've talked about this many times, taking chances and taking risk, comfortable making mistakes, as long as it's not a pattern, right? But if you set the environment, if you create an environment where it's okay to do those things, then you're going to have, in my opinion, you're going to have a much more productive employee and a happy warrior, right? I never looked at HR as the cover your ass department now, right? Well, we had plenty of Ref As, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit, right? And you got to have those Ref As because if you do see that pattern, you do have to take action. And it's not about the person, it's about the interest of the mission, and it's about the culture, right? And so you got to find that balance. But I always looked at it as my job in HR was to set the conditions so that everybody could be the best versions of themselves every day. And some of the things, and to build on that mindset of those concepts, we talked about and we enacted full employee life cycle planning, right? And so this includes, as we learn about a prospective employee, we learn their story and we tie that into how we spot them, how we assess them, how we hire them, how we develop and train them, how we review them, performance reviews, and how we retain them, right? And so, we do that with supporting career development plans. And then we came up with something that I thought was pretty neat, scattergrams, right? So I can show you where you are in a anonymous way with your peers. I could show you where you are, and I could show you why you're there, and I could show you what you need to do if you want to move up and to the right? And I can do that through visual representations, things like scattergrams, as well as discussions, right? We spend a lot of time talking about character attributes within our organization, right? And actually it's an unusually inordinate amount of time. But I think it's important because, and I'll come back to, how we did character attributes in a second, but I think it's important because, character attributes tied directly to core values. Mm-hmm. Core values ties directly to mission and vision, right? And if you can walk that thread all the way through and you can tell this story to prospective employees from the spotting stages of these are our character values and this is why they're important to us, and then carry that through, Now you can carry it through all the way through the training, expectation management, performance reviews, and all the way through, and hopefully extend that employee's life cycle. If we talk about character attributes, real quick too, because I like talking about the character attributes piece of it. I think some of them, are general and some of them are specific. And what I mean by that is, you and I, we just talked about integrity. Every single organization would want to have integrity as part of their character attributes and things they look for when they hired somebody, right? But maybe there's some that are organization specific. For instance, SEALs, we have physical courage. I'm not sure we need that in the SEAL team, but I'm not sure you need that in the private sector, right? But then when you get those figured out, and you're doing it through a transparent communication, hopefully involving as many people as possible, then you get to define them. And you can define both general and specific character attributes in a way that is aligned directly with your organization. And that's where the magic really comes into that stuff. And so we really enjoyed doing that exercise, and it really took hold, and it really permeated throughout the whole employee life cycle. We got to do 360-degree performance reviews, standardized pay bands, really hard. That's really hard work. You got to be transparent. You got to have a lot of communication, a lot of expectation management. You got to be willing to fail. You're not going to get it right the first time. People are going to be upset, especially in departments where, you're doing an upper review and there's only 2 subordinates. And so although it's not attributable, you're worried that they may find out, what's going on. So you got to be able to explain, why this is so important. And frankly, it may not be useful for all organizations, but for some organizations, it was certainly useful. Climate surveys, boy, we love these things, right? But, we may talk more about this later on, but, the key with climate surveys is you can learn a lot. You can learn about things you need to do, but you got to take action. If you don't take action, it's worse than having not done it at all.
Exactly. And then you have to tell people what you're going to do with the information that you received. I see some organizations fall short there. And what happens then is they breach trust with their employees. The employees take time to contribute what they feel is dysfunctional inside the organization, and then nothing happens. They don't hear anything until next year the survey comes around and they're asked to participate again. After a while, they sort of, why would I want to do that again?
Right. So, and so then you lose them, and, then you moved on to the next project, and everybody's like, gosh, you wasted my time and I didn't get anything out of it. So, you have to have an organization of, that have the right character attributes that you're looking for.
If you were going to take the time to invest in something like a survey, and you're going to, and I've done many of those over the years in my HR career as a consultant, and you're going to be asking for that feedback, you also have to be prepared for what that's going to tell you. And I can tell you, I've personally been in C-suite meetings where, in one gentleman in particular, I'll never forget him, his name was John. John was a shareholder within the company, and John was one of the key reasons why a lot of employees were leaving. And it was simply that he did not act with integrity. He would blur the lines on ethics. He was someone who couldn't be trusted, and he would promise a certain sales rep something, and then he would just simply renege on that. Well, after you keep doing that, you develop a reputation that no one's going to trust you anyway. So his character was part of the problem. Now, one of the things I know that you really talk a lot about, and I've heard you speak on this, is competence, performance, character, and trust. And for me, when I kind of look back on my career, and as you know, I'm in and out of a lot of different organizations working as a consultant, and I usually am the one that's working with C-suite. When organizations have a breach of trust, it usually is that there's a lot of this stuff with character that is broken. And when you have an organization that has a lack of trust, employees don't trust HR. What do? They go file complaints with regulatory agencies because they don't trust internally. You're going to have a lot more complaints because they don't feel like they can even trust their management to have a conversation. They fear retaliation, that even if they raise the issue of, hey, boss, I'm really concerned about X, Y, and Z, they're very worried about that backlash. And so that's part of why I always say the best investigation is the one you don't have to do. If we get this character piece right, if we can develop the leadership competence, we can work on the organizational values and alignment and build more of a culture of trust, we're really creating an organization that doesn't have nearly the dysfunction that drives the employee relations issues and investigations, and also the expensive litigation. Anyway, ball in your court.
Well said. Well said. And really, I mean, I wouldn't refute any of that and what I liked about the way you said it is that everything, what you did, and you did it intuitively, is everything was connected. So not only is the messaging connected through numerous vehicles and numerous concepts, but it's connected for the employee, before they even get hired, right? The messaging and the expectation management and everything that we're trying to do to set them up for success is messaged even before they get hired. And then it's carried throughout the life cycle. At the end of the day, we're looking to, build that competence and measure that performance in a transparent way, with the kind of data that can drive decisions, can drive organizational health, drive mission readiness, mission sustainability, because, sustainability is a piece that goes to culture too, right? Like, I love my football coaches that I see who have a great season and then drop off, right? And, there's a bunch of them. These are, good coaches. And it's like, well, I can do a lot through negative reinforcement for a short period of time. You can't sustain that for a long, long period of time. So mission sustainability is really important to me as well, right? When you have these conversations and you set these expectations on day one and you tell them that this is what success looks like in our organization, and this is how, you can be a part of the success stories, well, then you're right. I think it makes it easier, and it makes it so that they're less likely to not trust HR first, to at least, go explore different things that they can do to resolve the issue, but they're less likely to go outside of the organization to try and solve those things.
Yeah, very much so. So I think it's in kind of pulling it all together is we've got to have, first of all, the definition in each organization of what really are those values. What are those character attributes, if you will, that we are looking for inside our organization? And the values cannot be on just some shiny plaque in the headquarters lobby, and then no one really knows what the hell they are. And that's unfortunately what I see is I'll ask a question inside an organization. Well, what are your values? And then they're looking around for something that's written down somewhere. That's not the way this works. You should be able to articulate, right, like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what we're all about. And you should be able to do it right on day one. But if promoting that in all of the marketing literature and the careers page for the website, and we're communicating out on our postings, what is our organization all about? Now, I see a lot of job postings, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of fluff. And I know it's a lot of fluff because I look at the really lousy reviews that are on Glassdoor or other things. So you're saying one thing, but you're really doing another. What we're talking about here in this podcast about leadership and accountability is you have to walk the walk, right? You can't just say, hey, we're a really accountable organization, but then when you get inside, everybody points the finger and blames another. Where you can't say we're a really dynamic organization and we have great leadership, and then you're turning over your supervisor ranks at a rate of 75 to 80% turnover. See, that's not walking the walk, and you've got to have the alignment with those values. So it starts with that framework, but then it goes into the deep hard work that you were talking about, where you created and defined by using, if you will, rings or spheres that somewhat cross over one another, to understand what everyone is individually accountable for, but then those implied tasks and the accountability for cross-functionally. But then ultimately, I think organizations need to really define what accountability really does look like. It's one thing to say we're an accountable culture. We really want you to admit wrongdoing. Like I remember a CEO of a medical device manufacturer that I've done some work with, they're German-based, and what Oliver said is, I want a culture where people understand it is okay to say, I screwed this up. And he said, and that is what we want. We want someone to be able to say that. And of course, you can't do that every 5 minutes and keep messing things up because obviously there's a problem there. But there needs to be honor inside the organization to say, I screwed this up. But the other part of accountability is also understanding what the consequences are as well. And that means a high performance culture. One of the problems that I see, Tom, and I'd love to just get your thoughts on it, organizations that really continue to just give people chance after chance after chance after chance to meet expectations. And the employee continues to just give lip service and it doesn't turn around. I can tell you, I just recently consulted with an organization and this has gone on for about 10 months with an employee and it's still not working. What do you think the problem is there?
It could be any number of things, right? Obviously, there is a pattern with the individual. Regardless of what else, if I'm going to build this out from the center going out, there's obviously a pattern of disruptive behavior, right or wrong. Whether or not the individual is right or wrong, there's obviously a pattern of disruptive behavior. So the idea that we need to address this disruptive behavior is super important. First and foremost, you try and meet them on their terms, right? Give them a chance to articulate what's going on. See if you can make them aware that their behavior is disruptive, right? See where that goes. See how that works and document. But I don't think, we really want to hurt somebody's career permanently unless they've demonstrated a pattern of behavior and it's well documented. And then, and it's causing an undue adverse effect to the mission readiness and or the culture. So I think we address the person, in as innocuous a way possible, try and understand where they're coming from, see if it's got any validity to it, and then explain to them that even if it is valid or not valid, look, this is disruptive to the organization. It's not about you. This is about the organization. It's about the organizational health. We love you, but, right, the way this is going is affecting the organizational health. And then, as we carry that up, we're like, hey, why, to the supervisor, why do you keep giving chances? Are you documenting? Is it the same thing? What is this pattern? What's going on? Why can't you resolve this at your level? Why am I involved in this now? So give him an opportunity to explain. Give him one more crack at solving it. If all the ducks are in a row and the story is somewhat consistent and it's well documented and it comes up, to a higher level, my level, you got to be a little bit more decisive, right? The negotiation and the talking, there's time for that. And they certainly need to know that they're a valued member of the team. And they certainly need to know that, it's nothing personal, but it's also time for decisive action.
And part of what I see is you have a culture that talks about accountability, but then we turn around and we're not holding people accountable. And that's kind of my point. If we were very clear in those expectations, it was abundantly clear, and yet we have the same pattern of behavior where someone is not following through. And also, in some cases, particularly when supervisors have given tasks that are not anything that would be unethical, or these are just simply tasks that are expectations that someone carry out, but an employee just blatantly doesn't do it, well, that is also called insubordination when you have given people tasks and they have completely failed to do so. This is where a lot of supervisors today, through a lack of training and not even, they're being promoted in many cases without having the proper development, and therefore they don't even understand that already an employee is violating the company's code of conduct and that needs to be addressed. So for the listening audience, one of the key things I want to point out before we wrap up today with Tom is you've really got to make sure your supervisors and your managers, in the very early stages of them being put into those leadership roles, they really need to understand your values. They need to understand what that means to model those values day to day. They need to understand your organization's policies and their understanding of them, and they need to know the why behind them and how to enforce them. So simple, and yet we're not doing it. We're so willing to invest resources on the back end with HR and somewhat being reactionary with launching these investigations and dealing with all of this complaint stuff, instead of investing in the prevention and the front side of this before we even get down that road.
You talked about investigations there. That was one of the tools that we had in the military, and it's definitely an elevation in scrutiny, but it's not a bad tool, right? An investigation is an opportunity to discover truth. Frankly, it's an opportunity to solve root causes of problems. It usually uncovers additional problems that need to be addressed. At least my limited experience in the private sector is people are usually very hesitant to do even a low-level investigation. And I've never I've never really understood that, because it's a great way for, whoever you assign as the investigating officer, it's a great way for them to get experience in doing something like this. So it's professionally rewarding for them. And you're going to get to the truth, and you're going to have it documented, and you're going to be able to address root causes within your organization, because it's probably not just that one incident that you're investigating to be impactful. So I would say that, investigations are a key tool, but it seems like people are really hesitant to do that. And I think it's the wrong mindset to have about an investigation.
I agree. And, the whole thing is trying to improve the leadership behavior to avoid the impact on the employee that drives the complaint. But the other piece of this is, as you said, investigations can very much shed light on root cause. I can tell you personally, because we keep case management, we have a software solution, and I can sit down with some of the business owners that work with my company. And I did one of those fireside chat, if you will, with the CEO to go over the numbers. And I just shared with them a pattern that I was seeing emerge with one of his locations. And this was a CEO in the healthcare industry. It was really illuminating to see the common denominator was a particular member of his management team, where my consultants were spending a lot of time kind of doing damage control, if you will. And it was just a lot of one complaint being lodged after another. And the root cause of it was simply a manager who was promoted from within, had very, very little training, and really did not have any understanding of even how to model values. Now, he has some values in his organization, but they're on a plaque at his main location, and nobody really knows what they are. And so, anyway, that's where HR investigations definitely can shed light on it, and especially when you're in very large organizations and you've got the analytics, you can look at your Northeast region and at a moment's notice, punch of a button, say, we've had 6 sexual harassment cases in the last 6 months in our Northeast region. Why is that? It does give you that intuitive data in having the analytics. So that's one of the things I also recommend to my listeners. If you don't have a case management solution, now is the time, especially if you're a larger organization and you have more than 100 employees. You're really at that point where you need to have a case solution, because as Tom was pointing out, and I've reiterated numerous times, it is all about the documentation. So before we wrap up, Tom, can you share with our listening audience, which is mostly HR professionals, some tips, maybe 1 or 2 tips, when they're faced with having to coach employees who come to them and they're complaining about their supervisor, and the issue is really the employee's lacking some resiliency. The supervisors have done their level best to really coach the employee, but the problem is they just can't seem to handle the performance feedback. Instead of them absorbing and processing the feedback and making meaningful change, they want to point the finger and blame and not be accountable. Any tips to share?
Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to summarize my thoughts, and maybe someday we'll come back and we'll talk about SEAL team and how we did the SEAL team, because it's a little bit different from the way you do it in the private sector. But based on what we were talking about today, and looking at it from organizational accountability and individual accountability, let me chop it up into those two bins. And when I think about it from an organizational perspective, right, I think about it as culture. In my mind, accountability and culture go hand in hand in an organization, because if you want to be successful, if you want to be that high-performance organization that's selfless and committed to something beyond themselves, to the mission, because they know that individual gain will come if they're committed to that mission, then accountability has to be there at the organizational level. And that goes to the way you do culture, right? So when we talk about accountability, and we talk about competence and performance and character, we do it early on. We talk about our 360 performance reviews and why we do that early on, right? We talk about our employee handbook, right? When you get onboarded, you're going to have to read that thing, and you're going to have to sign off that you read it. Those are your FAs, and you're responsible for knowing those FAs. And the reason why we want you to know those FAs is because that's just the backbone, right? But if you know those things and you're responsible for those things, now you're freed up to do your job. Go do your job. Go do great things, and know that those are the FAs. Those are the ways that we just want to do the basic thing. That's the blocking and tackling of what we're trying to do here, right? And so talk about that early on in the spotting and recruiting phases to set the accountability expectations. And then again, carry that conversation throughout the employee's life cycle, right? Because there's opportunities when you talk about the character attributes and you talk about all those things in the beginning. It's set, it's standardized, and it makes sense to grade people on character as much as you do competence and performance throughout their cycle, right? Grade people on how well they take care of their teammates. It's important, right? And then if I move from an organizational perspective down to like more tactical one-on-one or small group interactions, I think you've got to be able to explain why it's in their own best interest to know where they're at professionally and where they're going. And I think it's in our interest as HR professionals to give them a roadmap, right? We got to have all the supporting documents in place for them to leverage and for them to reference, the performance reviews, for, in our case, the scattergrams, things like that, so that you can show somebody where they are compared to their peers, and you explain to them what they need to do to get to where they want to go. You know, when I think about that, and I think about, if I'm doing that good as an HR professional, I'm thinking, so what am I doing? I'm setting the conditions for that guy to be the best version of himself every day, right? And this is what I want to do. I want to set the conditions so that they know where they are and what they got to do to get to where they want to be. And so I would think this would make them a very happy and productive teammate, right? This is what we should all want. We should all relish the opportunity to be accountable in a way that we know what we're accountable for. And here's a twist, right? And if you're going through this in your head and you're thinking about this and you're trying to do these things to create these conditions, the conditions within your organization, and people aren't responding, or people are scared of accountability, or people continue to point fingers, maybe you're in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'd say is, look, it's not all doom and gloom. At every turn, at every opportunity, let them know that they're a valued teammate. Let them know they're a valued member of the organization, and you're there to help them. And ask them what you can do to help them, and then help them. And if you can't help them, explain to them why you can't help them, right? Be able to explain that stuff. Because at the end of the day, they just need to understand that we're all trying to build a culture of trust and mission readiness. And we want to have an organization that can evolve quickly without breaking over an extended period of time. That's what we're trying to do. And so we're trying to set the conditions individually for you to contribute to that. And we're trying to keep our eye on the North Star as an organization to do that over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And that's what I would tell people. I mean, I think it's really appropriate for HR professionals, but frankly, I think it's appropriate for any leader to be thinking about it like that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, it's important to let people know that we do value them, and it's in their best interest. And truly the thing that's been showing up lately with kind of the lack of resiliency and employees looking to simply blame their supervisor or blame others for, in many cases, their own shortcomings. They're not meeting performance expectations, and it may just not feel very good. Part of what happens, I think, sometimes is individuals have come into an organization where maybe there is a stronger culture of accountability, and they really didn't quite understand that. So they're coming from a place where their last boss really cut them a lot of slack. Now they're in an operation where there isn't a lot of slack to be cut. And so this is why I think it's critical with what we've talked about today for our listening audience, that from the very beginning, we have to set the expectations. But if you are working with an employee that is already inside the business and been there for several years, but now we have this issue showing up and maybe kind of a repeated pattern of some complaints, and they're pointing the finger at the manager, this is where I really do think it's important to have that discussion regarding accountability and values, and maybe even discuss the perception. If you have an employee that is continuing to do this, note the date, time, and the details of when they have pointed the finger at others. And then when you really sit them down and say, let's say, Ashley, I've talked with you on this occasion, and this occasion, and each of these situations we're dealing with you're not having met performance deadlines, and yet in each of these situations, you have pointed the finger at others, right? So sometimes what happens when you have a fact pattern that really shows them how they have not been accountable. And again, they may not necessarily be thrilled to have that conversation, but sometimes it's really necessary. And one of the reasons why I say that is that leaders, in wrapping up here, leaders are responsible for accomplishing results through others. If you are continuing to allow one of your team members to have a distorted view of their performance, and if we are not really being candid regarding some of their shortcomings, and we're sugarcoating it and we're tolerating it, then what you're also doing is causing a deterioration in the trust with other members of your team, because you as a leader are simply not being accountable.
Indeed.
All right. So that is it for us today on the HR Investigations podcast. And man, Tom, I really enjoyed visiting with you. I always do. It's just a joy to have you on the show, and I definitely want to have you back. I know that you've really helped a lot of the folks in my listening audience to understand a little more about leadership and accountability. And I just have to ask you, so when you were in Bud's training, did you ever have to do a sugar cookie?
I think that's the way you started every day was with a sugar cookie. Hey, yeah, everybody, sugar cookie was a daily occurrence for sure. For sure.
And for those of you who don't know that is when you're all wet and you're down in the sand and you're just wet and tired and exhausted, and then you were wrapped up like a sugar cookie. But anyway,
yeah, and the sand gets into all your crevices and
everything, and yeah,
and it just irritates you all day.
I really appreciate having you on, Tom, and so we will see you again soon. All right, for everybody,
Natalie, thank you. Hey, thank you very much for your leadership and your expertise. Not only when I was working, with my last company, but even now, and getting the opportunity to reach out and talk to you and learn from you is really special, and I appreciate that relationship.
Fantastic. I do as well. All right, everybody, that's it for me for the HR Investigations podcast with my buddy Tom. Until next time, see ya.
Thanks for joining us today on the HR Investigations podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with any colleagues who will benefit from our strategies and solutions. For free bonus resources, simply visit hr-investigations.com. And remember, if you'd like some help with improving your investigative skills, or if your organization is in need of an external investigator to help with a case, please get in touch with us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.